Um, Hello, everybody. My name's Jaime. I'm your neighbor, or for the panelists here, I'm your new friend. My home at 3501 Glenrose, up in the Upper Fair Oaks area of Altadena, was lost during the Eaton Canyon fire. If you ever walk down the street toward Loma Alta, you might have noticed a garage door with a mural of a black and white terrier. My daughter and her cousin painted that. Loved it. Like many of you, I lost my home. Since then, I've been navigating through a tough process of cleaning up and rebuilding. Along the way, I've realized that how valuable the information I've been collecting for myself it could be to other people, and I wanted to share it. And hopefully, with the support of the experts and the pros that we have on this call today, you'll have some information that's helpful to you. Next slide, please. Um, so uh, just wanted to be completely transparent with people here. Tonight's session is about sharing knowledge and supporting each other. The information provided is general guidance only and not legal, financial, or professional advice. Everyone's situation is different, so please consult your qualified expert or pro before making decisions. We appreciate those who are here to help us and want to protect both our community and the speakers here today. Use this information at your own discretion, and again, work with the professionals around you. Let's work together and rebuild stronger. Real quick, to go over the agenda. This event is a quick and easy way to meet experts and learn about building safer, healthier, and more energy efficient homes. Today's topics are going to be a little bit different than Tuesdays. We'll begin with introductions of the pros and experts first, and then we'll follow that up with an introduction to passive homes. After that, we'll dive into a quick dive into a Q&A session, aiming to answer many of your questions that you have about building a passive home. And we had so many questions last time that we thought we made a bury the lead, so we're going to get right into that. Next slide, please, Edie.
Well, and can we pause here and have just the pros who are on the call just come on and give your name, your company, and sort of your expertise, so the homeowners who are looking for resources can ask questions and know who you are in the chat? That would be great. And I don't know how to tell you where to start, but I'm going to start with Mike, because you're at the top of my screen. And the folks who are presenting formally tonight, why don't you hold off, because you're going to present yourselves when you go.
Thanks. I'm a pro. My name is Mike Horgan. I'm a design builder. I have been for about 23 years, East Coast, West Coast, and a few different countries as well. I own Karen Collaborative Design Build. We're based out of San Luis Obispo, California. We've built a passive house since 2008. We did our first one very backwards and made a lot of mistakes, and learned the hard way, rake the leaves out of the tree so we could make some money from raking the leaves. And we've tried to aim every project in that direction so far. I've been on the board of Passive House California for a few years. It just stepped off this year. I'm on the advisory board for 3C RAN, the Tri-County Regional Energy Network, and a few different boards around San Luis Obispo as well. So yeah, happy to help. Thanks.
Bob, you're up next.
My name is Bob Bowles. My wife and I have an architectural practice up in Northern California in Pacifica. I've been working for about 45, 50 years, depending on how you count my first job. We live in a passive house designed high performance house that we built about 6 years ago. Very happy with it. It's a great technology, or a set of technologies. And I'm available for general advice or whatever. Thanks.
That's great. Chuck.
Yeah, thanks, Edie. My name's Chuck Bauer from Joe Bear Homes. We're a passive house builder. We've built 5 passive homes from the Marshall Fire in Boulder County, Colorado. And yeah, like Mike, our first one was nothing but practice. We didn't make a dime. Actually, it cost us quite a bit, but we got through it. We know a lot more now than what we did, and you know, our team is doing a lot better.
Darren, you got to back it up. You're right there next to the Chuck.
Hi, my name is Darren Duchan. I'm work with Chuck at Joubert Homes. I'm actually based in Los Angeles, and working with Chuck and the whole Joubert team to amplify the whole passive house message into the conversations that are taking place now in LA, both in the Palisades and Altadena and Malibu and Topanga, about rebuilding homes, and also working with a whole bunch of sort of government organizations and other stakeholders to try to increase not only the awareness of passive houses, but also some of the potential benefits, including working with the state insurance commissioner to try to get some of the big insurance companies in California to increase insurability for a certified passive house and potentially provide some financial incentives in cost to passive houses.
Fantastic. Mary?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Mary Kovacs, principal designer at Aramin Kovacs Design. We are a design build firm established in 2009. My husband is a partner at our firm. He is the certified passive house consultant, certified through Passive House Institute US. You'll hear from Isaac, I think, in a little bit. He was our certifier, great to work with. We built a FIA certified home here in Studio City, California. That's where we're based. We have about 4 more coming up. 1 is almost done. 3 have broken ground already. Really, really happy to be here and join this amazing team of people who are really trying to help us grow this type of building, a responsible building that we believe just should be the way to go from here on. We take our clients from design, architectural design, to permitting, to interior design, to construction. Kyle's also the licensed contractor of our team. And yeah, here to help answer any questions you might have.
Fantastic, Mary. Brian, you want to say hi?
Yeah, thanks. Ryan Gear here, actually down in South Orange County. Longtime friend of Edie, and we've stayed connected about this because recently I've had reason to be involved, and a designer down here in Laguna, and looking to help how I can. My dad, who's on the call here, went through another natural disaster a long time ago. So we have a lot of background in navigating political, community, and building processes that we can advise on. So that's why we're here.
Fantastic. And I believe that's all the pros that I'm seeing on the list. I will introduce myself. I always do that. I just jump to collaborators. I'm Edie Dillman. I'm one of the co-founders of B.Public Prefab. We're a prefab company that was launched in 2019 to offer high-performance envelopes to achieve passive house very easily across many climate zones, California to Minnesota, and even into Canada. I'm sitting in Santa Fe, New Mexico, but we have been very fortunate to help people rebuild from the CZU complex fire in Santa Cruz and in the Marshall fire. And of course, I'm sitting right in the center of, fire districts all around New Mexico. This is very front and center to our practice of helping people build from the ground up and helping rebuild. I didn't mention this on Tuesday's call, but I live in the 5th passive house certified by the Passive House Institute in the US. and the first condo that was certified by the Passive House International. So I definitely launched this company and jumped in knowing how important healthy housing is and how much I love not paying a whole lot to be hooked onto the grid. So this is personal, it's professional, and it is definitely community driven. And I have to thank all of these wonderful pros for being here and supporting the LA fire rebuild. We are not all based right there, but we are certainly with each and every one of you and trying to offer as much information and support as we can. So I will switch slides. And Jaime, I think it's right back to you, talking about where we're starting this conversation, oops, in comparison to the long process of rebuilding.
Yeah, thank you for that, Edie. Yeah, I'm going to go over this pretty briefly and talk about an evolving timeline. Please keep in mind, timelines will be unique to you and your home and your family, and what you intend to build. I use evolving purposely because I found projects can be dynamic and ever changing. If I can offer one key piece of advice to folks in terms of managing the scope of their project is to define your scope, and the next experts will talk about that in upcoming slides. But try really as much as you can to control the change orders. That'll keep you as close to the estimate that you get from your builder early on. And it's the best way to keep your project cost under control. So that's, if I can offer one piece of advice, I give you that. This is a high level first time home builder perspective, me being the first time home builder, on what you can expect. Its purpose is to provide a visual framework that to help you think through the different steps in your home rebuild project. So today what we're going to go over are a little bit of designing and then rebuilding. So with that, I'm going to now hand that back over to Edie to talk about how to plan your rebuild.
Thanks, Jaime.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just a nice moment of pause at the beginning of a lot of new, novel information for a lot of people around what is the intent in rebuilding and what are the goals for the home. You know, there were a lot of really beautiful historic homes and well lived in homes, and imagining the need for space, and then maybe what can be new and imagined in this new rebuild. And in the opportunity we're sort of presenting here is that you can rebuild to a much higher quality of construction, as well as enjoyment of space and your home. And we're going to talk about Passive House, and we're going to talk a little bit about fire hardening and how those are related. But this is, for all of us, the largest investment that we will make. And so, you know, setting those values up front of what we want it to represent, whether that's, you know, natural light so that you can paint, good sound quality because you're going to record your next album in your home, or just enough space for all the clothes and clutter and the kids. So just setting those expectations before we get sort of overwhelmed with all the insurance and everything else, but really setting some purpose to it. And we've had clients come to us with manifestos about what they wanted to manifest truly. And for all of the architects and builders on the call, those words mean so much to us because that gives us power to make your dream home come true. And, you know, it may not be Passive House, but really imagining that future space so that all of this hard work is really making that home real for you. So that is my 2 cents. And we're going to talk specifically in this living room session about Passive House. So I want to thank again, we've got a lot of amazing professionals here on the call. And Passive House is an ecosystem. So there are a lot of people in the US and around the world that are involved in Passive House. It is not unique to the people on the call. And there are a lot of professionals involved and trained to support your rebuild, from certified trainers, tradespeople to certified consultants, along the way. And there are a lot of architects and builders who may not be in the area, but they're happy to look at your project and support some of your decision making and exploration. So on this call today, Isaac is here from FIAS, based in Chicago. There's some Passive House California folks on the Passive House Network side, and I actually sat on the board of the Passive House Network for many years. And Passive House California is creating quite a bit of support around this. And so after Isaac walks through sort of the basic principles and benefits of Passive House to sort of frame this, Bronwyn is going to step into sort of the architect's perspective around designing specifically for California and Passive House. So thank you all for being here. And there are a lot of great resources, and we'll put those direct links to the organizations into the chat and in the follow-up from today's meeting. So on to Isaac. And please introduce yourself, since you did not during the pro section.
That's right. Thanks, Edie. My name is Isaac Onlacave. I work at FIAS, which is, as mentioned, as the Passive House Institute US in Chicago. We just got finished with a snowstorm here in Chicago, so I'm missing my days from California. So I wanted to start with what kind of are the principles behind Passive House, and these are general principles that we all kind of stick to. And there's really 5 of them that you want to think about. But the important point that I want to emphasize is, as I'm mentioning these, think of Passive House as a systems approach. These 5 principles, among others, work together to basically say that the sum is going to be greater than the parts in terms of doing this. Each one of these helps others, and helps magnify the energy savings, helps magnify the benefits while minimizing the cost. So the first principles are, number 1, it has to be airtight. And we mean, and when we're talking Passive House, we really do mean airtight. Generally, it's going to be someplace between 3 and 4 times more airtight than the code. Climate appropriate insulation. In other words, what we try to think about is how to maximize the amount of insulation based on the climate. In other words, the amount of insulation you're going to need in Minneapolis is going to be different than Miami, and it's going to be different than in Los Angeles. And so we think about very hard how to make sure that the amount of insulation is the maximum amount that's cost effective. Number 3, we want to be thermal bridge free. View thermal bridges as those areas of your house where either hot air, where your heat or your cool flows out of it. That's outside of what's being insulated. So we want to limit those locations. Number 4, we want to make sure that you have high performance windows and doors, because among other things, windows tend to have less insulation value than your walls. So we want to make sure that the windows themselves are high performance, installed correctly. And finally, because we have a nice airtight, well-insulated home, we want to make sure that your ventilation system is adequate for the task, to make sure that it both provides clean air constantly coming in and exhausts stale air coming out. And finally, one other thing that I wanted to add is all of this, by doing all of these kinds of actions, what tends to happen is that the size and the amount of heating and cooling that you will actually need diminishes. So one of the things we always emphasize is that when you end up with much smaller heating and cooling systems than you would otherwise in a code home. Next slide. So the short part of the benefits is that, number 1, it uses about 40% less energy than code. And that immediately affects your pocketbook in terms of lower cost of ownership. So even if anybody mentions that there is some higher incremental cost, please note that that will be made up every month as you use less energy than you would otherwise. But just as importantly, passive house homes are resilient. In other words, they, among other things, they will maintain their temperature during extreme weather. We have found this in many places. So during a heat wave, it'll stay cool longer than other houses, and during a cold snap, it'll stay warmer. And it's a very important aspect of this. Another one that we talk about is noise reduction. Because it's so airtight and because the windows are installed well, you then have control as to the amount of noise you have coming into your house from the outside world. And we have found that for many people, this is one of the most important ones. We didn't expect it originally, but people love the fact that they have control over the noise in the world. Healthier interiors, we make sure that radon is dealt with, that all the aspects of the what are called the EPA Indoor Air Plus program are incorporated so that you have healthy interiors. And again, as I mentioned, you have we are very focused on ventilation and making sure that the air that's coming in and is clean, and that you're exhausting stale air constantly. And finally, because of the air sealing, because of the exterior insulation that we talk about, you have very strong bug and pest control. So these are kind of the broader issues, the benefits that come into it. I'm happy to talk into much more excruciating detail if you would like. I will put my information in the chat and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Isaac. On the last call, there was a lot of mention of ants. And having lived in Claremont, California, I know those micro ants. I want to keep them out, make it airtight. Bronwyn, welcome.
Thank you, Edie. So hello, everybody. My name is Bronwyn Barry. I am an architect. I am based in San Francisco, so same state, a little further north from most of you, I expect. I have been practicing as a passive house architect here in California for many years. And in 2007, I completely overhauled my practice and focused exclusively on building passive house only in California. Along that journey, I am also very proud to say that I'm a founder of both Passive House California, which we started in a living room up here in Berkeley in 2007, 2008, a bunch of us here up north, and have grown that organization, and you'll hear a lot more about that coming up. I then also, with a bunch of other organizations that organically grew up across the US, including Passive House New York, Passive House Northwest, Maine, New Jersey. There were a bunch of us. We all founded the Passive House Network, which is a national umbrella organization supporting all the regional sort of grassroots passive house activity happening across the US. And again, I'll share a lot more about that a little later. So my next slide, I want to show you some projects. These are my own projects, and I share them not specifically to promote myself, but I wanted to show you what passive house can look like in California. And I hope from these images you will see passive house looks very familiar. My own designs have ranged from sort of California barn to a modern bungalow craftsman style. And then the top left is a more recent project in Monterey, kind of a little more luxurious project in Monterey that really referenced Monterey modern design. So really encouraging you to think of passive house in a broad framework. A lot of people have preconceived notions about what is passive house, and really it's just a much better quality way of building that uses great building science, and simple physics. So next slide, please, Edie. And as you can see, this is that same project I just finished in Monterey, showing all the same features as what Isaac outlined. And I like to sort of couch them in terms of, super insulation. And again, as Isaac mentioned, that is really relative to your climate. This home really only had a 2x6 wall. It was all we'd needed in Monterey because the climate there is pretty benign. We have a bunch of projects in LA that are built to passive house. They are a 2x6 wall with some minimal exterior insulation. But if you build a simple form, you need less insulation. So I encourage you to consider keeping things simple. The simpler the form, the more efficient it can be built. And another couple of things, I like to talk about airtight building in California as smoke-tight building, because Californians sort of have an aversion to the idea of being airtight. And I think everybody here on this call can really recognize that we are all living in a smoke, wildfire, endangered zone. Every project in California is subject to wildfire smoke, if not the really devastating effects of the actual fires that you folks in Altadena have recently experienced. So the 5 principles get applied to any design, and really keeping it simple is key. If you'd like to go on to the next slide, please, Edie. So what does that really mean in California? And the biggest myth that we are told everywhere in California is that our code is already great in California. And I have a hard time convincing people of that fact because the myth is super pervasive. And yet, this study that came out last year was looking at 50 houses, real designs, designed by various architects all across the US, 11 of which were located in California. And the map on the right shows exactly where they are. Some were in Northern California, some were in the mountains, Sierras, and a good cluster of them were all down south in the LA, extending down to San Diego. And all those houses were modeled, and then the data for heating and cooling specifically was put on this chart. And you can see on the left there is our California Title 24 predicted heating and cooling loads. And all the bars to the right are the various passive house standards. So FIAS and the PHI building standards. And every single one of the passive house standards performs better than our Title 24 energy code. So that would be the first set of data points that I would really encourage you to look deeply at. You will hear from a lot of people that, oh, we don't need passive house in California, or, oh, passive house is only for cold climates. And of 15 years of data, I've had the DOE study my projects. I have numerous reports. I have the Public Utility Commission analyzed 2 of my own projects compared to 5 Z&E homes. And interestingly enough, passive houses beat the pants off of the Z&E homes even, which are better than code. And even more fascinating, they actually perform much better than the Z&E homes during the summer, not the winter. They're about the same as the Z&E homes in winter. So let's go to the next slide, Edie. I have been working for the past 15 years, not only designing passive houses here in California, but really advocating for more of these at both the state and the national level. And so I'm really pleased to share this information with you folks. We have worked with the, I serve in a volunteer capacity as the policy director for the Passive House Network, so at the national level. But I'm still highly involved with Passive House California folks who are a chapter of the Passive House Network. We have been working with the CPUC, so the California Public Utility Commission, to implement a specific incentive program that will offer $20,000 or $30,000 specifically to projects that target certified passive house in their rebuilds. Now, and the caveat to this, unfortunately, the launch of this has been delayed. It was supposed to come out at the end of last year. I have been promised by the CPUC that this will be issued soon. So I believe that all of you folks in Altadena and Pasadena and Palisades should be able to access this funding. It should be launched in the next month or two, and I hope not much longer than that. We've also worked with all the other incentive programs. A specific one is called CEDA, California Energy Design Assistance Program, which is set up to offer both architects and homeowners financial support to design better. And we negotiated with them that this will include passive house modeling. So whether you're doing FIAS or PHI, we negotiated this for both pathways. I have not come across any project that has leveraged this just yet. So full disclosure. I am looking to do this with one of my own projects based in Chico in the coming months. So I just encourage you guys to reach out to that. The QR code on this page will send you to a page that has links and information on how to reach these folks. But CEDA, California Energy Design Assistance, you can Google that as well and speak to the folks managing that program. And lastly, on this slide, training. We have been working very hard for a long time to build really robust training opportunities that are specific to West Coast building types, both at Passive House Network and through Passive House California. And Passive House California has been actively subsidizing Californians going through this training. So then we have also negotiated specific subsidies through 3C REN. So if you are connected or located in the 3C REN community, it's Ventura County, San Luis Obispo County, and Mike, you help me out what the third county is.
Ventura, Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo.
Santa Barbara, thank you, that's the one. If you are a professional based in that jurisdiction, 3C REN provides free training to you. It's an insanely generous subsidy. We also have negotiated contracts with PG&E. I believe SoCal Edison also is now participating in this. But all of these are accessible through Passive House California and the Passive House Network. So it's a hybrid training. So whether you're a new professional or a homeowner and you have engaged an architect or a builder, get them to take the training. It will benefit you and your project. It's an immensely great resource for you to avail yourselves of. What else do I have to say? I want to just end with a little advice to all homeowners. I want to emphasize what Edie and Jaime have also mentioned. Please sit down and really write down specifically what it is you really, really want from this rebuild. It's a terrible tragedy that you've all had to navigate, but I hope you will also avail yourself of this immense opportunity that you now have to build back better. Passive House Network and Passive House California are really working hard to support all the homeowners to build back better. I think it would be a terrible tragedy if we simply replaced what we had and didn't really give ourselves the chance to really address a lot of other issues that we now can do in this. This is incredible, a new opportunity to build something different. So I'll end there and let other people contribute, but I'm more than happy to answer questions in the chat, and I'll be here speaking about a couple other things too as we go through this. Thank you.
Thank you, Bronwyn. Really, and beautiful. I, of course, want to go right back to the initial slide of all the beautiful homes that people can imagine. The most common question I think all of us folks in Passive House and in construction are asked is about how much. So we're going to go through a couple of slides, and Bronwyn, I encourage you to talk through this with me. And I'll switch the slide, but I hate to do that because it'll have sticker shock. So I'm just going to sit here for a second on the QR codes. There is a lot of range in what we are hearing from builders in California about construction costs, period. And on the next couple slides, we're going to talk about really what the difference is in terms of upfront costs for building to this standard Passive House. And what is sort of expected in the area for square foot costs. Bronwyn, you were sharing that you finished a home and it was, fairly affordable in terms of what we're hearing. So I'll just say, we are talking to people that sort of the baseline is $500 a square foot and above to build. And we're hearing wildly different prices from different folks getting bids back. Certainly, I want to be sensitive to folks who are hearing from their insurance company and what they're actually being told and offered, and that it is going to be a mismatch, and we are sorry that is somewhat always the case in these situations, and there's a good fight to be had. But in terms of setting realistic, so I'm going to change to this next slide where we use data from a survey that was done on a California home for the Passive House Network, and we can put the link in there. It's a little bit, it goes over a lot of these principles, but looks at an actual project. Now I can't even click it. That was a 3,000 square foot home. So it was a $1.8 million build. And they analyzed what the difference was in sort of standard construction or code construction to ultimately how this house was built to Passive House. And where were there differences in cost in the investment to get to Passive House. So again, this is an example cost of an actual project that we broke down to something that is more in kind with what we're seeing in the Alphabets or in Altadena, smaller, modest bungalow and case study homes of 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,500 square feet. And when you break that down at $600 a square foot, and I'm going to switch to the next slide, which sort of shows a pie chart of where that investment shifts a little bit for that better air sealing, for the insulation. But looking at this, that national average, and we talk about this a lot, and there are a lot of people who are going to shake their head on this. National average from code to Passive House is 2 to 8% upfront investment over code. And as we see the adoption of better codes, eking towards passive house, and certainly better materials being available. When I built my home in 2011, there were no triple pane windows available to us in the US. We had to like beg, borrow, and steal to get windows from Germany. Now we have 15, 20 manufacturers. And the great benefit looking at California is you just need a really excellent window. And we were going to fight for that tempered glass, but it can be a double pane. It doesn't need to be triple pane like we need in the mountains. So I'm going to explain this slide. The portion of construction that is different between code and passive house is really that investment in those windows and doors, in really air sealing and a weather barrier, like an actual barrier, a material that is the weather barrier, but also making sure that it's there and installed properly. The insulation we talked about, and then the ventilation systems. So it's not everything, it's a portion of the build. And where that is redistributed, you can see here is, you're investing a lot more in windows and insulation, and a little bit more on ventilation to get that performance. So this pie chart representing just these elements being that 3.4% over code that was invested in order to get to passive house.
Yeah. And I'll weigh in here too, Edie. The other thing that really does not cost more, but does require attention to detail is all what Isaac mentioned, the thermal bridge analysis, how your windows are installed, and then all the connections of your air sealing layer or your smoke tight layer. And I can tell you every single one of you will want smoke tight buildings. And I'm ashamed to say that California is one of the last states with a decent energy code that still does not require blower door testing for our buildings. There is an assumption in the code that we build tight, but it's never actually tested on site. And this is another thing that Passive House brings to your build, is that quality assurance and the on-site verification. And it's, as I say, I'm shocked that I've been advocating at the California Energy Commission for literally 15 years, asking not for passive house levels of air tightness, but simply blower door testing. And they're only now just starting to consider it, which doesn't mean they actually will require it yet, but we hope. And again, a big differentiator for Passive House is that verification and the testing, because that's what the difference is between baseline, unknown outcomes and Passive House. So, big difference, major quality control.
Yeah, and it really is a tool. I mean, if we're not checking, certainly those ants have a place to come in. Mike, and I think, blower door test is one of those things, it's almost an acronym. I know what you're talking about, but it may be, worth talking about more, sharing information after the fact. Mike, I'll let you jump in here.
I'll be brief, I think so. For people who, I don't know how many people are in this webinar, and I don't know how many have built or been in construction or in any way, shape, or form, but a lot of the stuff that Bronwyn was just talking about and showing in her slide with the schematic drawing that she showed, the stuff that you're doing in Passive House for people who've not built a house before, none of this is particular only to Passive House. These are also things you're doing in code built houses. The difference, and this comes from a builder perspective and an economic perspective, is that the things that we do when we build a passive house, you're getting a real return on investment from the thing that's being done. You're not paying $700 for a window that is just an opening with a view outside. You're paying $730 for a window that's an opening with a view to the outside, but it's also thermally broken. It reduces the sound. It's triple pane, or maybe it's a good double pane that doesn't heat up as fast and break in a fire situation. You're paying a tiny bit more for membranes, WRBs, weather-resistant barriers on your homes, which are required on every home. But the ones that we use when we're building to our standard, it's actually doing the thing that it's meant to do. You're getting, 99% value of the thing you're paying for versus, honestly, most of the stuff that gets put up in a code built home, you're getting no value for. It's a visual. You've put a WRB on your house, and there you go. You've passed the code checklist. So all the things that we're doing are not only in a passive house. They're in every house, but we are doing them with a far greater attention to detail, which in California really does come down to the attention to detail almost more than anything, So I don't want people to think that this is like a new realm.
Thank you, Mike. And I think, when Jaime and I first started talking about these neighborhood meetings of just how much people were paying for, gas to heat and cool their homes in Altadena. And, that is something we can stop. Those volatile, energy bills, we all need to stop. Like we can spend a little bit more care in building and then stop sort of that waste of money and certainly waste of resources. So, Isaac, did you have your hand up? And we're gonna, yeah, good, go for it.
If you could go back to that previous slide just for a second. And I want to just emphasize this point because I know I made this point earlier, but I think it's really crucial. All of these points, windows, air barrier, insulation, ventilation, heating and cooling, Passive House really views this as a systems approach, a holistic approach to design. These are not individual pieces. I mean, they are individual pieces, but when you're doing the design, you're thinking about how they interact with each other and how they help to amplify the energy savings. A good example is insulation is great, but when you put air sealing, that makes the insulation more effective. And when you remove thermal bridging, you then make the insulation again really reach its actual value that you want. And so we all really think about how to do these designs. And that's why, while there is going to, as it's noted, there is going to be a little bit of an extra cost, things actually aren't as costly as we think because we are thinking about it holistically. A second point that I want to emphasize, and I think this applies again to both organizations, we both have very robust certification, third-party certification process, which is really, I think, a key for homeowners as you're thinking about this. When you are doing a passive house certification, it's going to be reviewed, and it's going to be reviewed by experts and by people who are committed to getting it done correctly, both at the design and at the construction level. So there is an additional sense of security that you can have as you're doing this.
I think that's a really good point. And I think, we've gotten slightly into the weeds, but I do appreciate that, we've gone over some slides and Sarah's going to share more about monies that are being brought to bear for homeowners to afford any of these sort of additional services and to offset so that it is, it's a benefit. And we worked in the Marshall Fire rebuild in Boulder, Colorado, and there the utility Xcel Energy was giving homeowners $37,000 per home that's certified. That was a meaningful motivation to work with people who were really going to push and test. But there were also a lot of people who, they didn't do that, but they did work with professional builders and architects to build with this systems approach to get as much out of their construction as possible and follow these principles. So I think it's important that, there's a lot of professional expertise when you're thinking about designing and building your home, and that there is potential for truly building better. And this is a big part of getting to a better build. Jaime, and then I want to go on to Sarah, because of course we have so much information. We're all gonna share.
Yeah, I have a question and a comment. Maybe I'll do the comment first and then the question after. So the real quick comment is that you hear a lot about these terms, and many of the audience here may be very familiar with it, or you may be not, like thermal bridging and what that means. I think Isaac tried to explain it as best to his capabilities. I like to look at things from the benefit as opposed to what the technology is. So the benefit, and Edie mentioned that earlier today, is like if you have an airtight home, if you have a closed envelope, it's harder for these micro ants to get into your home. It's harder for smoke to get in a home when there's fires nearby. So really look at it to the benefits in terms of lower cost of ownership. And the technology is there, like the analogy I like to use. Yeah, when we first got iPods, it wasn't about how, the type of storage device that could hold all those songs. It was that you could have 1,000 songs in your pocket. So I like to remind all the great experts here in the pros is that we may be talking to folks that aren't as familiar with passive home construction. So if we could talk a little bit more about the benefits, I think that might be hit home a little bit more. The next thing was a question. I see a couple of questions here, Edie. I want to see if we can hit those questions before we move on to Sarah's part. If that's okay with everybody, just so that we do it in context. And I think people are here to get some answers. So that's where I would lean towards, but it's
Great.
up to you.
Yeah. Do you want to prompt with the questions?
Yeah. So one of them from Ken. Ken, feel free to unmute yourself and ask this yourself or provide clarity. Ken.
Yeah, I will. When Bronwyn was talking, she was talking about putting some kind of, I don't know, air test or something into the code. And what I said is, we don't need more red tape and inspectors. We need to streamline the process so we get our houses built. And the more roadblocks you put in the way, the worse it is for us, not better.
Yeah, so if I can help with that is there's two things. One of the things that came from the first session, Ken, is that people wanted to know about cost. That was a big question. Well, first they wanted to know more about passive homes. Then they want to know cost is like, how much more will they cost me? I think this is a nice evolution of a question is like, how much, there's different times, right? There's like a cost, actual dollars, and then there's a cost I think Ken is getting at time because what we're sensitive to as people that want to get back into their community at homes as quickly as possible are those really two things. So the pros up to you. How can we work to, build not only smarter, but how do we build quicker with high quality?
And Ken, I would just like to add, I completely agree with you. We have actually been, and there's a slide that's going to come up here later to show how we've been really also actively working to remove roadblocks for people to do better. And the advocacy for adding blower door testing. Honestly, we are, again, the last state in the union that has an energy code that actually does blower door testing. And that's not to add more complexity, which, I completely empathize, but really to verify what you're actually getting. Because when you buy a code-built home, there's very few checks that actually it was built to what was specified and that it actually is sealed to whatever the code, which is very loose, by the way, 3 times, 4 times of what a passive house is. There's literally no verification that it actually does deliver to that. So, we'll talk more about that, the removing roadblocks a little bit later in this presentation.
That's great. Thanks, Bronwyn. Ken, from homeowner, a person in your shoes of rebuilding, I'll talk about from a benefit standpoint. What a blow door test is, I think what you were referring to, can help with. And I learned this in my process, in my journey here, in talking to like Bob and to contractors and builders I was reaching out to, is one of the, if you're going to get into an issue with your contractor, let's say later on in your relationship with them, it's highly likely it's probably going to be from a leak in your house coming from your roof, based off what they've seen, and you don't want to be in that position with your builder. The benefit of having air tightness and the benefit from doing a blow door test is that you can identify where those leaks are going to be very early on while you're still doing construction, and prevent those from being a problem for you later on. And you don't get into was it the design? Was it the build? You can have that actually resolved by having the blow door test. So while it might be an additional step, it actually gives you a huge amount of benefit that your home is really very tightly sealed.
Can I
Back to
ask
you.
for a show of hands of the builders of how many of you have a blower door testing kit just to do it for your own assurance? See, I think that's a really good point for everybody on the call, of people who are really caring about the quality of the build and ultimately not having 30% of your energy costs fly through leaks that they left in your home. These folks, even when it's not required by code, are doing it to confirm their work and direct their crews to seal those holes, or good job, keep going, right? That
And-
gives the assurance that you're not going to have those leaks. I think it's great to see all those hands go up.
Edie, I was just going to say for Ken real quick, the blower door test is really important to a passive house and to ensure the quality of the project. And it is a big milestone task, but Ken, the physical aspect of doing the blower test is just a few hours on a single day for a construction crew to set up and do. It's not a roadblock in the construction process. It's a pretty quick and simple process that if you don't know what's happening, you'd never notice. So I wouldn't really consider it any roadblock at all.
It's different if the builder does it as part of their regular course of action. I built this, I test it, I find some leaks, I fix it. It's a big difference if a government inspector gets involved. Every time you get a government inspector involved, it's a problem. I mean, even if you're just doing a remodel or something like that, government inspectors are pains in the ass. And so the builder, yeah, I guess if quality builder does it and guarantees their work, that's fine. But yeah, anytime you involve the county, you got a problem.
Sounds like Ken has built something already, and I think great perspective to share with other folks in the community who have not had that experience, and sort of things to be wary of. I would be slightly remiss of not saying that our company designed a panelized system so that we can sort of assure a lot of this performance the first time for builds. And to try and simplify this, we are always looking for ways to speed things up, and of course have the jurisdiction and the inspectors really happy. We want that gold star, and we want to keep that project going. And any way we can continue to communicate and be clear to keep them off our sites and us moving forward is really important. Jaime, did you have another question you want to do, or should we move on? Because I'd love to have Sarah run through some of this, and we haven't talked about sort of the fire hardening and WUI. Yeah.
There's a question from May. May, did your question get answered, and does that work for everybody else here? She had a question about passive house details need to be specified in the plan, or can you choose a passive house qualified materials? From my perspective, May, there's a continuum, right? You can choose to go all the way one side and say you want to be passive house certified, or you can choose certain systems and materials to get you to along that continuum. I come from the aspect of I may not want to get certified, but I do want air tightness for all the benefits that these kind folks have stated. So you can speak up and say if your question has been answered, and we can move on, or if you like some more detail.
Yes, I think so. Thank you. I added one more question about how I choose architect. If I want to go with this path, should I find the right, how do you find the right architect if you want to build a passive house? Not architect probably know how to do, or they know but they never did, or they should know if they want to draw a plan for a passive house.
It's a really good question. It is a specialty. And there are architects who specialize in doing commercial high rise. And there are people who are residential builder design firms. But in terms of asking about, do they know about passive house? Have they done, any form of green building in particular? Do they have a lot of energy excitement about these things? Have they built, design successful projects before? And of course, I think Bronwyn and Isaac and all of us can add links in the chat in terms of websites that list professionals who have gone through training and have successfully built passive homes. And I know Sarah's going to come up next from US Green Building Council, and they have amazing resources and lists as well. And we do have some information, and it is that was a bit of the conversation we had on Tuesday, and we will reshare the YouTube to everybody who's on this call of like, what do they do? What are architects? How do you hire a builder? How do you hire an architect? And I think it's really good to ask those questions, May, and feel free to be inquisitive about that. And there are professionals who have offered to volunteer of helping vet and make sure that you're making a good match. And Sarah, I believe you have a matchmaking slide. If
I do.
Yeah, so we'll get there. But I think, May, this
Yeah.
is a really good group to ask for resources. And what questions are excellent questions to ask if you're talking to an architect.
Thank you. Hi, Sarah. She's from my blog.
Yeah,
Aww.
she's my next door neighbor. And I see a couple of my neighbors on this call, so it's lovely to see you. For those of you who I have not yet met, my name is Sarah Wolf, and I'm an Altadena resident. I did lose my home in the Eaton fire, so I am looking at rebuilding in a more resilient way. I also work at the US Green Building Council of California in the Los Angeles office. And so I'm here today just to share some resources and some of the work and training that we have to support the community, both in Altadena and in the Palisades, and wherever the next fire is, to build back in a more resilient way. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the U.S. Green Building Council, we are an independent nonprofit organization. We are a chapter of the national organization, which does the LEED certification on buildings. Like I mentioned, we cover all of California. I'm based in the Los Angeles office. You can go to the next slide, Edie. So we've talked a lot about Title 24, and this is part of the California Building Code. For those of us in the wildland urban interface and live in the foothills, there are a couple other things to keep in mind as you are thinking about your rebuild and working with architects and builders. Some additional, you can go back. I mean, we're not at that slide, other way. So we're also in the, in this interface, wildland urban interface, we will also likely need to meet Chapter 7A, which is about fire resistant materials. And the other thing you should also be aware of is that the state of California is remapping Altadena for fire zones. So where I lived in Northwest Altadena, we weren't actually in the very high fire zone. I think we were mapped to the high, but this could change, and there are different building requirements and materials depending on which zone you're in. So something to keep in mind. I believe those maps should be coming out in the next 2 weeks or towards the end of March. So that will inform how you rebuild and what applies to you. So I just want to highlight a few things. Edie, you can go to the next slide now. Thank you. A few things to keep in mind as you are rebuilding. We have a rebuilding guide coming out very soon. These are just some of the highlights from the guide. There'll be much more information. We're really looking at price, sustainability, and resiliency. So there'll be options on every category of building material, and even looking at things like setbacks, which I know on my street we had very small setbacks between the houses. We are very densely a very dense neighborhood. So some of the things to keep in mind. Regardless of what you build, you need to keep in mind to have at least 5 feet of defensible space around your structures. That means no vegetation, no trees, no plants, and definitely no mulch. The ideal is to have at least 15 feet between structures. I think I probably had, I don't know, on one side, maybe 3 feet between my fence and my neighbor's fence, and maybe 4 feet on the other side. So we really need to think about the siting of our new homes and how we're going to, site them on our lots. And we might need to use our deep lots if you have a deep lot, rather than go wide. I lived in a neighborhood that had a very peaked roofs with lots of different roofing angles. I think the idea here is that we want to have a simpler roof geometry, not to have vents in the attics, or at least have some ember resistant venting covers over those vents. On decks and fences, no wood. We're looking at metal, concrete, stone, and brick. When I went back to my property, all the wooden fencing is gone, but the brick is still there. Some of the pavers are still there. So those are more fire resilient materials. There's been a lot of questions about, do I have to have a metal roof? These are some other options for Class A roofing materials. So Class A meets the fire code for roofing materials, but there are a few other options. So you don't necessarily have to have a metal roof. We've talked a little bit about glazing and windows. The best is to have the outside layer of your glass as tempered glass. I'd say at a minimum, double glazing, triple glazing, or double, and the outside pane is tempered. And then fire resistant siding. So I had a stucco house. I thought, I have stucco, it doesn't burn. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. But there are some options for siding. And also the idea, again, to that defensible space, we don't want any fire to come to our homes. An hour of fire resistant siding is great, but there's no guarantee the fire department's going to come in that hour to put out the fire, as we've all sadly learned. So that's just a taster. There's more to come on rebuilding. You can go to the next slide, Edie. So you can use that QR code. We have a lot of information and resources on our website. So please check it out. We have free training classes. We have lots of webinars, recorded content on wildfire rebuild and recovery. I think you can go to the next slide. So, and as Edie mentioned, we are offering a matchmaking service. So if you are in need of a certain kind of expert, or if you're interested in a passive house or net zero energy builds, or maybe you just need to find a contractor, or maybe you need a surveyor or a geotech engineer, you can express your needs on a form. And we also have lots of experts in our community who are wanting to help and provide a service as well. So I encourage you to use that service. We have a homeowner's toolkit around wildfire defense that we are in the process of updating. It should be ready next week. So you can download this. It really goes really in depth into home hardening strategies. And even after your home is rebuilt, how do you keep that defensible space? How do you keep your landscaping so it's not going to catch on fire? And just have your, as you're living in your home, just keep those home hardening strategies and in place. You can go to the next slide. This is the Sustainable Rebuilding Guide that I mentioned. So we're working with ARUP on this guide, and there'll be pretty detailed information on all the different aspects, like as you're looking at your roof line, keeping it to a simple geometry, which is, I think it was Bronwyn who talked about, if you're looking for an efficient way to build, yeah, keep things simple. Think about building in blocks, or, a simple slope, not a very steep slope where you're going to need lots of different roof lines where embers could get trapped. So just thinking about simplifying your design and choosing materials that are more resilient to wildfire and better for the planet. You can go to the next slide. This has been mentioned a couple of times as well. So homes need to meet California Building Code Title 24. There is a bill in the Assembly, the State Assembly, that is, if it advances, will provide another pathway, an alternative to Title 24. So if this bill is passed, and if you are interested in passive house and sustainable and resilient rebuilds, please support this bill as it goes through. It will provide another avenue. So people who want to build passive will sort of automatically meet Title 24. And Bronwyn, you can jump in if I've totally said that the wrong way. But my understanding is that it will create an additional pathway, and they'll be essentially equivalent. So there'll be two ways you can meet the energy code.
Hey,
Bronwyn, you had you have more to add on that.
Sure.
Explain Title 24? Because I don't even
Okay.
many people know what Title
Sure.
24 is.
Great. So currently, whenever you build any new building or even retrofits, most retrofits in California, when you get a building permit, you have to also comply with the state energy code. And the state energy code is referenced as Title 24. It's part of where the law that governs that compliance is housed. So what we have found after, and I've personally navigated this for 15 years here in California, is we are trying to remove one more barrier for people who want to go above the baseline code, which is the Title 24 compliance pathway. So many other states here in the US have added this alternate compliance pathway that allows people who are building certified passive house projects, either through FIAS or through the Passive House International pathway, to not also have to do the Title 24 energy compliance model. It just removes one additional step, which is why we want to get this in place, because we know that building passive house is a little bit harder, a lot more rigorous, and always results in higher than baseline energy code energy and comfort and performance outcomes. So this current bill that is now being read in the California State Assembly, it's being sponsored by Assemblyman Christopher Ward, who's from San Diego, and he was the former chair of the Housing Finance Subcommittee, has picked up this bill. It's been championed by a broad coalition of organizations across California, including USGBC California, which is fabulous. We've got a huge coalition of folks behind this. It's been led by Climate Action California, who has navigated this to this point, and we hope that you will call your state assembly member and tell them that you want them to support this bill, because this will give you sort of all of us wanting to build better a sort of a quick path to building to passive house, and just take one of the barriers away, which is just having to do a second energy model and pay for a second compliance checklist.
Thanks, you, Bronwyn. Sarah, we got a question for you. It's more of a comment in terms of people's reactions to the insurance costs that may rise. Um, so are there anything when you build better, are there anything that we've seen in other areas like in the Marshall Fire in Colorado or the CZU lightning fire where insurance costs are kept the same or lowered because of the 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 way people built their homes?
Um, I, I'm not at all qualified to answer insurance questions, but, and I think in California, insurance is in such a state of flux. However, I have recently read that communities who built back after fire became like a fire-wise community. So at the community level, everyone adopted these, I don't know if it was passive house, but adopted more resilient building practices. And as a community, they were able to get insured again. But yeah, that is a question on my mind. If we know we build back, can we get insurance? Of course, there's Fair Plan. So that's the insurer, of last resort for California. So I guess the short answer is yes, everyone can get Fair Plan. What it will cost, no idea. So I think that's an issue. I think that's an issue we should be watching, and we should also be advocating with our assembly member representatives and our senators and with Catherine Barger's office to make sure that issue isn't sort of left to the side. So we definitely need an answer on that.
Yeah, I think one thing we can say is, Sarah, you and I and people in the community is to see if we can help um, look at what it takes to be firewise as a community so that we can um, be able to be insured and be insured at a relatively good cost as opposed to having our rates go up. But thank you
And,
for
Jaime, if I might interject, it's one of the things in the last couple of weeks. Those are some of the conversations I've been having with the state insurance commissioner's office is to look to very much try to get the people of the representatives from the big insurance companies specifically to the table to try to talk about giving passive house, a certified passive house, that greater insurability. It is early days, but they were the insurance commissioner's office was very receptive to the idea. But the next step is, of course, having that conversation with the insurance companies themselves. But and Sarah, will be reaching out to a couple people in your office this week to have a conversation with them about those conversations I'm already having with Ricardo Lara's office. So maybe there can be some teamwork on that.
Yeah, that sounds great.
I love that collaboration. And I think, we keep on bringing up this image of the home in the Palisades that stood when everything around it did not. It got a lot of news coverage. And it talks about a lot of the principles that we've talked about today in terms of the simplified form factor. Of course, Class A rated exterior materials. These were tempered windows and doors. And you can see, I think there's only one vent coming out of that building. So there weren't lots of places for embers to land. I know we all like to water our beautiful plants, but that was all gravel with that concrete boundary around. So really protected, defendable space with really smart, simple materials and form factors. So again, Bronwyn showed a lot of really great examples of what passive house can look like in great design. But this is a really nice example of something that did do very well under the worst circumstances. And it represents a lot of those principles all in one form. I saw a hand go up. Was it
Yeah,
Jaime?
it's Mike. This is actually a great segue because there are a couple of comments in the chat from Osiris and Deborah, and I don't want to speak on your behalf, but maybe Sarah, you could speak to this as well. As you can see, that there's not that much room between this home and their neighbor's property line. So people, when they're looking at like the 5 foot first zone and then the zones that go out, as a, they're saying, well, my house is going to be very thin because of that. Wonder, Sarah, if you can speak to a little bit to that, is like, how do you have these defensible zones when you really are in a dense area, you don't have large amounts of area for your home to be built?
Yeah, and I think that's something we all struggle with. I've been to many wildfire defense classes, and they show homes that have like 100 feet around them, like built in the wilderness, and that's not Altadena. I mean, a few have homes were like that in Altadena, right in the foothills, but most people don't have, 30 feet of defensible space around their home, or even 15 in some cases. So, um, I'm not. I I think you have to work with your architect on how to site your property in the safest way possible. If you just don't have the space, then you just don't have the space. And if you can only do 5, then you do 5. But I'm not on the permitting side, so that's a county question. But yeah, it's something to keep in mind, and what you put in that, maybe what you put in that 5 feet, like yes, use concrete or gravel or stones or something. Don't put plants there. It really needs to stay clear. I don't know if that's a very good answer, but yeah, that is a struggle. My property is not very wide either, but it is quite deep. So we're looking at maybe building further into our backyard, changing the footprint of our house to better kind of, create as much defensible space as we can within the parameters of our lot. So I think an architect could definitely help you with that question.
I think that was a beautiful answer and a great question. And I think it has been brought up in a lot of these conversations of how can neighbors team up. We've talked about sharing a surveyor with your neighbors and making sure those boundaries are clear so that you can move forward in your design process. I think this is a really great example of if you collaborate with your neighbors around, a shared fence. First of all, it would be a shared cost potentially between the properties, but also deciding on something that you feel like is protective. There's not a great example of this in this picture, but there is mesh that can be run in a fence to have the ember arrest, so that even if it was an open looking fence, it's going to stop those embers from moving, maybe not as much as, concrete, but certainly that you could have different aesthetics that are with materials that are designed to help protect the whole community and each other. So I think that's a great place to team up and maybe start talking with neighbors of how might we would divide between our properties differently. Bronwyn, is your hand still up?
Yes, it is.
Jump
And this is perfect sort of segue into this conversation because something I would love to hear folks in the LA region doing exactly what Edie was saying, get together and collaborate with the neighbors. I think I did look up, there are some other opportunities, but they are limited to areas that are not currently in the WUI fire zone. And Sarah, it sounded like your house is not or was not and may be rezoned for that, given the current situation. But there is a law on the books in California, it's called SB 9, that allows homeowners to do a lot split. So unfortunately, it's limited to properties that are not within the wildlife urban interface zone. So if any folks are, able to do that, it's a way for you to potentially leverage some of the property to be able to create 2 homes and use the second home to pay or help offset some of the costs to rebuild that may not be covered by the insurance. And if you didn't want to completely split your own lot, maybe if you worked with a neighbor and you each split off a back portion of your maybe longer, skinnier lot and looked at doing a shared driveway down the middle that all of you could use, that is another really great opportunity to think about how do you site homes on properties and share resources with your neighbors. So just throwing that in there. For those of you who are not currently zoned WUI, SB 9 is the bill you want to look at if you would want to dig into that potential possibility.
May I ask Mary to jump in? Do you have thoughts on this? Because I know you've worked in density in California around the setbacks. Is there anything you want to jump in with?
I think that just paying attention to the materials that are used, setback requirements can vary between jurisdictions here in Greater Los Angeles. We typically just, follow the setback requirements, as most people want to kind of take advantage of what they can on their lot. We've done several SB 9 projects. I really don't have much more to say about that.
And yeah, it is. I want to chime in here really quick. It is a privilege if you have that amount of space to do the setbacks and the numerous number of zones. There's a neighbor of ours that's on the corner of Loma Alta and Glen Rose, and they have quite a big number of properties there on the corner house. They're older, but their house were undamaged, where the majority of the block was burnt down, and it's because they had pretty much dirt between them and all around to the street and to the next door neighbor. So, as Sarah said, yeah, if you have that, it's great, but not all of us have that privilege. What can also help, I can talk about my home in particular. I think it was probably either the embers flying in to the vents that then started the fire inside my house. So building a passive house will help prevent that because I can shut that off using the system. But the other thing which I don't like is my neighbor's house fell over our wall between my upstreet neighbor and my house, and that heat or radiant heat that came from that may have also caused the fire in my house. And I don't like walls. But if you go back to that Chasen house that you were showing, Edie, you can see that he has these cinder block walls that help the heat that was coming low. And you can see that on the bottom, if you go to the bottom of that, you can see where it's all dark and black. That's where the fire was trying to spread and come up from the ground. And that's why you try to trim your trees up so there's nothing for it to catch in terms of leaves. So these small cinder block walls help prevent that fire from moving to that neighbor's house when that car was on fire. That's to the left. So even if in tight situations, you can do things like these very small walls that can help prevent the fire from spreading on the ground. And then if you have an airtight home, you can prevent the air entering through your soffits and eaves and into your home and starting fire from the inside out. Thank you.
That was great. Donna, you've got your hand up, please.
Yeah, I just, I mean, you guys are kind of talking all around this, but you've got to admit that this was kind of a once in a lifetime event in Altadena specifically. We had, 110-mile-an-hour winds like a hurricane of fire. I mean, that's not going to happen all the time. And houses that should have been more defensible burned to the ground, and houses that were regular old wood houses didn't. The fire just kind of skipped, hopped, jumped because of the wind everywhere. My house burned to the ground. So but my next door neighbor to the south of me, her house is fine. The house behind her, we have a lot of front and back houses on my street, burned to the ground. The house behind me burned to the ground. I have cinder block walls all around the backyard, and they're still up. But there is nothing left of my house. There's nothing left of my neighbor's house to the north and all the houses above it. There's one or two houses here and there that are standing for no apparent reason. So a lot of these things that you're saying don't necessarily apply to this fire, my opinion, for whatever that's worth, because it seems very random, the houses that were left standing. But my biggest problem is, again, in my street, everything is very close together, and that's not going to change. And because if we build like for like, We can get through the permit process faster. A lot of us won't have to pay extra money on our property taxes, all of that. So a lot of people, most of the people in my neighborhood, want to build back like for like, including myself. That means my house is right next to my neighbor because I had a long ranch house. And to build back in the same footprint, I can use this, I can grandfather in the same setbacks so that I have all of the square footage that I had before. If I don't do that, I can't build the same size house that I had before. And all I want is what I had. So my question, and I noticed a couple other people had similar comments about their property and such, is okay, for lots of reasons, I can't do all of this. I can maybe not put plants around the edges of the house and things like, there are some things that, but for the people who are going to, for various reasons, want to build back like for like, even though they can't do all of these other things and they're going to be grandfathered so they don't have to do the setbacks, what other things can they do that will at least help a little bit for a normal fire as opposed to what we went through on January 7th?
Right. It's a really excellent question, and thank you for sharing. And I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for you and all of your neighbors. Brandon, do you want to jump in? Anybody's welcome. Yeah.
Sure. And there was a great comment in the chat about what the like for like actually means. So it doesn't have to be exactly the same for you to still qualify for that. So check for what the definition of like for like actually means.
I already sat on a 2-hour call with the assessors and have been down there, and I will continue to do that until I'm, set with building back. But part of it is if you move your house around on the lot, you may not be able to achieve the same grandfathering in the same setbacks, which is what I need to do to achieve the same. I'm not asking for much. I just want the house I had back, and it wasn't a huge house or anything, but it's also not a huge lot. So if I do things too much different, I will not be able to get back my same house. So that's my problem, and it's the problem of a lot of my neighbors.
With the two things, what you asked, what can you do of the things that we've shared? And I'll tell you, air sealing or smoke tightness, that can be installed wherever I of all the passive house things that I want in every project, I want the smoke tightness. And I would also highly recommend the ventilation system, because once you do a smoke tight building, having a really fabulous heat recovery or energy recovery ventilator installed will give you, again, a quality, great indoor air quality, really resilient building. So those are the two things. You can build them. Those two things are not contingent on setbacks, but really will deliver the level of quality and an additional insurance for any other fire that comes down the road.
Thank you.
That was a really good answer. And I think it seems to me all of these properties have limitations and they are all unique. And I think understandably, you can't have everything. I think being here and you're doing so much to learn about things you probably never thought you would ever need to know. So thank you for patience and asking really good questions. And I think the air tightness and one thing about the air tightness, and we've talked about ventilation, but I also want to say, they have a MERS or a HEPA filter on the air coming into your home. So truly, the example of the one that I was just showing you, the house that did make it through the Palisades, that it's one of the very few that when the owners went back in, that they could occupy, because there wasn't ash and there wasn't smoke damage everywhere. So that is one element that we really want to protect. Yeah, this fire, as many of the fires we're seeing, is hopefully one in a lifetime. However, we know that other fires are going to happen, right? And so when those fires happen, when the air in Los Angeles is not clear, that inside your home you are safe. And if you had to evacuate again, heaven forbid, that hopefully your home would you would return and you could occupy it, where a lot of these homes are going to have to be gut right remodels because there was so much leakage and so much damage. So I'm sorry to sort of hammer in on those points, but I think in picking and choosing, I thought Bronwyn, that was really helpful. And I think there's great materials and you know, a smaller unit. That's why we went for the example on the pie chart and the costing of a 1,500 square foot. A lot of these homes were very modest, smaller homes, and there was not a whole lot of room on either side. I repeat over and over again, we want to build more like a log. A log is really hard to get to, you know, it will burn. If the fire and the heat is right there up against it, it will burn. But if your house is built like kindling and there's lots of those little details and ember spots and, you know, things can get into the attic or through window gaps, that's the danger we want to avoid. We want to just build really thoughtfully and protect and good materials to protect the home so that it doesn't invite fire. Yes, of course, if it's right up against the home. In this case, there was nothing that could be done, but we can still build fire wise and healthy. Ken, you are next.
Hi,
And
Yeah,
then
can I
Mike.
just say, I was just going to say one thing, which is I have some friends in the Palisades who had a house in the Alphabet Streets. If you've seen those aerial shots where the whole thing is gone, they were one of 3 houses that survived that in that area. And they were, you know, counted themselves very lucky, and they still feel very lucky. But when they went back into the house, as you just said a few weeks ago with an industrial hygienist, everything in the house that isn't metal, ceramic, or glass is gone. I mean, they have to get rid of it. They're going to go down to the studs back inside the house because of the toxicity that came in through the air. So even though the house looks relatively unscathed from the outside, there's a tremendous loss on the inside. I mean, all their furniture, their clothes, their books, their carpets, it's all got to go. So the smoke tight component of a passive house is critical. The director of operations for Joubert, Mark Tard, you know, there was a huge fire where he had a passive home. He was able to go back in 2 days later, and the air quality in his house was fine. But neighbors of his experienced the same thing I just described as what's going on in the Palisades. So it makes a big difference.
It does. And I lived in the area in 92, and if the window was open, my whole house was covered in dust from just regular old smog. And that is a factor of this health consideration of every day. It's nice to keep pollutants out, but then, you know, after an emergency. Mike, you are up next. Go for it.
I thought I was up next.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's right.
Where are you? I can't see you. That's why.
Darren took my space. So
Hey, play nice. Come on. Okay, go for
it. Yeah. No, I was just going to. Well, first of all, I was going to double what Don said, which was that I lost 3 houses in this thing. My own house and 2 rental houses. I had 4 houses affected by the fire. One was the sister of one of the rental houses. It is standing. And not only that, it's in pretty good shape inside. Why? We don't know. The 2 houses were built same year, same builder, same everything right next to each other, right? Okay. But that was my question. That was just doubling down on, you know, it's a crapshoot. You don't know what's going to happen, and you really don't know why. But part of it had to do with a comment about my main house, and then a comment about my rental house, which was 2. And my main house was built 100 years ago. It is what I would have called a passive house because I did not have HVAC. There were 3 days a year that it felt too hot because of where we were in the foothills of the San Gabriels. It doesn't get all that hot there all that often. And so I didn't have HVAC, and it breathed. And what we did in the summertime is we opened the transoms, and the heat convected up to the roof, where we were vented at the roof with passive venting. Obviously, that's not code anymore, and I'm going to have to, start spending energy. We'd get those things from from SCE about how you were using energy compared to your neighbors. In the summertime, we were like, you know, the champion of the world. You know, the codes are going to force us to use energy in ways that we wouldn't have to if we could rebuild like we had it before. So that's just a comment. Are there passive, and when I'm talking about really passive architectural things we can do to maybe take advantage of passive convective solar, where we heat some area and it convects into the house space or something in the summertime, because we do get a lot of solar, I mean, in the wintertime, because we do get a lot of solar energy, and converting it to electricity, converting heat and light to electricity and then trying to convert it back to heat is stupid. You know, it just makes no sense from a thermodynamic standpoint. So that's the other. My second question around from that, other than are there truly passive things that we can do that don't use external energy in order to do what we're trying to do? The other question is, for my rental houses, can I justify the extra cost of this passive thing? They all had, you know, a later construction, you know, mid-century. They all had HVACs. So, you know, and my thing is to build back to code, whatever it is. What's the benefit to me as a landlord to go that extra 20 or 30% to get what you're defining as passive? So those are my two questions.
Those are great questions. I know Mike's got an opinion and he's got his hand up. I was going to jump in and say that that is the point. Like your home being a battery and conservation first. We talk about this a lot of. It's designing for conservation first and taking advantage of natural cooling and solar gain when it's appropriate and shading. I live in a 2-story, 2,200 square foot house in Santa Fe. So it gets very cold and it gets very hot. I have no cooling in my house. So I am clearly opening those windows when it's summertime and it's cool at night to allow that natural cooling. I also have, you know, a ventilation system that's constantly circulating and refreshing. But the point is that you really want to minimize what you need for any energy use for that heating and cooling, and then those systems get really small. We didn't talk about that a whole lot on this talk, but really, you know, paring down what the systems are for heating and cooling. Generally speaking, what we're doing at B.Public is all electric. So if it's heating and cooling, it is, you know, heat pump, mini splits for heating and cooling. And they're just much smaller than you would put in a conventional or code house. And your question about your properties, of course, we like saying do the right thing, but sometimes that's hard to do without sort of justifying it on the bottom line. One is, how are your tenants paying for their utilities? You know, if you basically have almost nothing in terms of power going in there for heating and cooling, does that mean you can price the rental units accordingly for your investment, your upfront investment? And then a lot of the developers we talk to about rental properties, it's less maintenance. It really is less headaches if there are less systems that break down and smaller systems, like pulling a head out of a mini split as opposed to like having to redo an entire ducted system. Easier. Mike, I'll let you answer that as well, and then whatever you wanted to say before.
I was going to say a couple things. Ken, I'll be down in the area soon. I feel like I could probably have coffee with you for 8 hours and answer a lot of your questions. But to the landlord and to having renters, I wasn't going to talk about that, but since you mentioned it, one of the groups that I'm working with on the Central Coast actually is the probably largest developer on all of the Central Coast, and they've been there for about 4 decades now. And they've recently brought my team in the last, no, I hate saying my team, our team in the last 6 months, because they know what we build, and they have found out that there are virtually no maintenance costs on projects. So if they're going to build a bunch of homes, they have an 1,100 home development that they're thinking of building. And they're realizing now that if they build these homes to the passive house standard, and they still own the homes and they're basically large scale landlords, they've reduced one of their biggest overheads in being a landlord, which is the maintenance on the project and the upkeep and the operations of the project. So There's a huge reason. If I were building a rental property right now, I would 100% build it to this standard because it's virtually set it and forget it and you walk away. The main thing I was going to talk about was that there are a few questions in the chat about where it's popular, where passive house is more popular. And I think that parlays into a little bit of cost and some of the myths surrounding cost as well. I grew up in Massachusetts. I built in Massachusetts. The first project I built the passive house standard. We didn't test it. We barely even knew what it was. It was myself and another woman architect in Dennis, Massachusetts. We just went for it. Thought, what the hell? So I've built with really thick walls and double stud walls and 3 to 6 inches of exterior insulation. I've built in Australia. I've built in Florida. I now build in California. A passive house home in California is virtually the same construction. If you're talking to the guys in the field, it's virtually the same construction. There's not really anything too unique to it. It's generally a 2x6 wall, standard 2x6 framing. You could even get away with a 2x4 wall with exterior insulation. Then you run into an issue of, will structural engineers let you have a 2x4 wall? So we've found that the happy medium is a 2x6 wall. You don't have to do more stuff. So when you see a passive house in Norway and you see a passive house in Sweden, colder climates, they're going to have 13, 16-inch thick walls because they need that amount of insulation. We don't need anything like that. We need standard California construction, but we pay attention to the details. And the 5 things that Isaac talked about, those are the pillars that you shoot for. We actually teach the crews in the field. It couldn't be any easier. Forget about the giant code book. We got 5 things we have to do right. We just have to do 5 things right, and we can build an amazing home. And you already know how to do these 5 things. So it doesn't bring a huge cost factor into it. If you're looking at the regions where a passive house gets built, then you could go to cost disparities. But passive house is climate oriented. The certification is climate based. So you don't build the same house in Altadena or San Luis Obispo or San Francisco. You actually don't even build the same house in San Luis Obispo as San Francisco. Bronwyn and I would probably have different wall assemblies, even though we're a couple hours away. So we're not talking about anything that's extraordinary when doing this. Any crew that's working on the homes here is going to know how to put these sticks together. There's a little process of showing how to pay attention to detail, and there are a few different ways of doing that. But we're not trying to do anything that's wild. So when you're talking about building back like for like, you should be able to do that. You don't have to be thinking, God, do I need 13-inch thick walls in my house? I'm going to lose all this space. I'm going to lose that square footage. You're not.
Yeah.
You can build back with a 2x6 wall. Most of you probably had 2x4 walls. I'm going to assume that unless you have a magician for a structural engineer, they're going to force you to go back with 2x6 walls. So you're going to lose a couple inches. But generally, you should be able to build the same house that you had, but it's just going to be a better standard of home. So we're building a California code home. There's nothing unusual about it, but we're paying attention to those 5 points that Isaac talked about, and that's going to be the difference. You can still have like for like, but the feel is not going to be like for like. I'm off my soapbox. Sorry.
I'll just chime in on the cost. Ken, passive house in California is literally 3 to 4% maximum, and that keeps coming down. Just finished a house that I designed in Sacramento for an employee of the California Energy Commission, and it's 4 bedrooms, 3 bath. It was on the slide deck. It's custom built, and it was $430 a square foot, 428 actually. So I challenge a lot of custom builders to deliver anything close to the quality for that price point. Most custom homes in California, in Northern California, are $600 to $800 a square foot. So it's totally possible. It's careful attention to details. And I saw this fabulous quote just recently on LinkedIn, and it was a Dutch guy. And basically the saying that he had on his tile, the beautiful Delft tile, like written, that had put into his passive house, and it said, if you target quality, and then if you target cost, you'll get the cheapest possible home. But if you target quality, you'll actually be able to find the cheapest way to deliver that. So target quality first and work backwards to see how you can make that cost effective. And it's just a very different way of looking at buildings, and aiming and actually getting for what you really, really want. So don't give up. And it's the whole myth of cost is loaded with a bunch of nonsense that I could debunk all day long. So
That almost sounded like a really good place to end, although amazing conversation and lots more to be had. I think it's excellent to think about setting those intention and finding trustworthy partners and having the goal of craftsmanship, knowing that the outcome of having, a better built home is all of the things we've discussed. And we do hope faster and with less headaches through inspection and land use and all of it. I have to say thank you to everyone who was here. We're going to take a break on the living room sessions. Eventually, these will be in person in the area. It was named because we have so many friends in the area who want to help, and some of them did not lose their homes. And so they literally said, I will open my home. Let's meet in my living room. I want these conversations to happen in a safe and comfortable place, and this is what we can do. But we'll be back probably in a couple of weeks. We will share this recording. Some issues were had with the last Zoom recording, so we're just going to put it right onto YouTube, and it'll be in an email response to everyone with the YouTube link. It will go on the LA page or the rebuild page on B.Public. And I think we will share contacts for all the pros who were here. And there are many more who were not here tonight, some who were on Tuesday, some who will be on future, but many people who want to help, who've offered to review contracts with you. I will repeat that a lot of urging was made on Tuesday of take your time. Don't put down money, deposit, sign contracts with people until you feel clear and you have a really trusted partner and you've talked to past clients and you feel like it's the path. We don't want people rushing in and then getting into any kind of trouble. We want to help on the intention and finding trusted partners. And certainly everyone on this call is a trusted partner. And Jaime, back to you for your incredible work in the community. And Sarah, and thank you to all the homeowners. And we are so sorry, but we are with you in this journey, and we're so glad you were here with us. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their Sunday.
And thank you for that, Edie. And Ken, I would invite you when these experts are in the area, come sit in the living room and ask this question that you're talking about that indoor-outdoor living that we love so much in California. Many of the builders here live in California. Mary has a house in Studio City. She's going to open up a tour of a house they're building in Sherman Oaks for us. And she can show you the indoor-outdoor living. She has got a beautiful home in Studio City. I heard a podcast of a home in Ireland where the woman had the door open, and then Edie shared her story where she opens up a window. You can still have a passive house and still maintain that environment for yourself, even if you open up a window or a door. So you can still have that indoor outdoor living. But we can get more into that in the living room sessions in person in the future.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Great to see you all.